Hollywood, the autumn of 1936. On a producer's desk on the Columbia lot sat a single sheet of paper, a cast list freshly typed. Names stacked in a neat column, each in its place, each in its size. At the top, in the largest letters the machine could strike, one name: Bing Crosby. Below it, the supporting players. And nowhere on that page, not in large type, not in small, was the name of the man who would steal the film. Louis Armstrong had already been hired. He would play, he would sing, he would appear on camera beside the biggest star in the country. But in the language of Hollywood in 1936, appearing was not the same as being named. A black entertainer could light up a scene and vanish from the credits as if he had never been there. That was the rule. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody had to. And then Bing Crosby read the sheet. He was the most powerful voice in America that year. Records, radio, box office, all of it. He could have signed the page and gone home. Instead, he set it down, and he said something to the men in that room that they were not expecting to hear. What he asked for would put a name on the screen that Hollywood had meant to leave off. The men around the table went quiet, because they understood immediately what he was really asking, and what it might cost. This is the story of a single line on a piece of paper, and the friendship that put it there. Louis Armstrong came to that film already tired in a way audiences never saw. He was 35 years old and had been carrying American music on his shoulders since he was a boy in New Orleans. The horn had taken him out of poverty, out of a home more broken than he ever said aloud, into concert halls across Europe where crowds stood and wept. But the road had been merciless, split lips, a ruined embouchure, nights when he played through pain because stopping was not something a man in his position could afford. He had a new manager now, a tough, blunt man named Joe Blazer, who had promised to protect him and to get him the things other black artists were denied: real money, real bookings, real respect. A film was part of that promise, not a cameo shot in a corner, but a place inside a major Hollywood picture, sharing the frame with Bing Crosby himself. To most of the country, Louis Armstrong was the smiling man with the golden trumpet and the handkerchief, the one who made everything look easy. What they did not see was how deliberately he chose that smile. It was armor. It was strategy. It let him walk into rooms that were built to keep him out and leave them having changed the temperature without ever raising his voice. He had learned, painfully, not to expect his name in lights, so he prepared to do what he always did: be brilliant, be gracious, and ask for nothing. He did not yet know that someone else in that building was about to ask on his behalf, and that it would come from the one man with the power to make it stick. To understand what happened in that room, you have to understand the rules of the world outside it. In 1936, Hollywood was a machine built for a divided country. A film made in California had to play in theaters everywhere. In the North, where a black star on screen was a novelty, and in the South, where it could get a picture pulled entirely. So the studios learned a trick. When they used a black performer, they filmed his scenes so they could be lifted out. A musical number, self-contained, easy to cut. A theater manager in a southern town could snip those few minutes from the reel, and the story would still make sense without them. The performer was there and not there. essential to the film's spark and disposable to its distribution. And the credits followed the same logic. To print a black entertainer's name beside a white star's in matching type was to make a statement the studios did not want to make. It was safer to leave the space blank. Louis Armstrong knew this arithmetic better than anyone. He had spent a decade watching his own genius be welcomed on the stage and erased from the marquee. Audiences adored him. The paperwork pretended he was passing through. So when he arrived on the Columbia lot that autumn to make a picture called Pennies from Heaven, he expected the usual bargain. Play brilliantly, take the check, ask for nothing in writing. What he did not expect was that the biggest star on the lot had read the same cast sheet and had decided the usual bargain was not good enough. The question was whether anyone would let him change it. The word moved through the production the way uncomfortable words always do, quietly, sideways, in the spaces between takes. Bing Crosby wanted Louis Armstrong billed, named, credited in the film, in real type, the way any featured player would be, not slipped in and slipped out, not filmed for easy removal, named so that every theater in the country would see the two of them listed together. To the men balancing the budget and the bookings, this was not a small favor. It was a risk with a dollar figure attached. Southern circuits could balk. Letters could come. The careful machine that kept black performers removable would have to make an exception, in ink, on a major release. There were reasons to say no, and all of them were about money and fear. Louis Armstrong, for his part, had not asked for any of it. That was not how he operated. He had learned that pushing for his own name could cost him the whole job, and a man with a band to feed did not gamble the job. So he stayed in his lane, warm and easy, and let the trumpet speak. But he heard the whispers too. He understood that somewhere in an office he was not invited to, a decision was being made about whether he existed on paper or only in the air. He had been in this position 100 times, and it had almost never gone his way. What he did not know was how far the man at the top of the cast sheet was willing to go to change that. The answer came in a meeting where the numbers were supposed to win. Bing Crosby was, in 1936, something close to the sound of America itself. His voice came out of every radio, relaxed and warm, as if he were leaning on the doorframe of your own living room. He sold records by the millions. He filled theaters. When Bing Crosby wanted something on a film set, the men who ran the studio listened, because his name on a poster was worth more than any argument they could make. But there was something the public did not fully know about him. Crosby had grown up on jazz. He had studied it, and the musician he studied hardest, the one he called a teacher without embarrassment, was Louis Armstrong. Years earlier, Crosby had listened to Armstrong's records until he understood how a singer could bend time, could phrase behind the beat, could treat a lyric the way a horn treats a melody. Much of the ease that made Bing Crosby rich, he had learned from a black man the industry wanted to keep off its credit sheets. Crosby knew this. He never pretended otherwise. He said plainly and often that Louis Armstrong was the beginning of it all. So when the two men were finally cast in the same picture, Crosby did not see a supporting player he could tolerate. He saw the source. He saw the master who had shaped him, arriving at last in the same frame, and about to be treated, on paper, as if he barely existed. For a man who owed as much as Crosby owed, that was not something he could sign his name beneath. The cast sheet was still sitting on the desk, and Crosby had made up his mind about it. The scene they made together did not announce any of this. That was the strange, quiet grace of it. On camera, there was no speech about justice, no swelling music of triumph. There was only Bing Crosby, easy and smiling, and Louis Armstrong with his trumpet, the two of them trading a song as if the walls the country had built between them had simply never been poured. Armstrong sang and played, and the whole frame tilted toward him the moment he opened his mouth. The horn came up, and everything Crosby had studied for years was suddenly right there in the room, living, breathing, better than any record. Crosby did not compete with it. He knew better. He stood inside the number and let the master work. The way a student stands aside for a teacher he has finally earned the right to share a stage with. For a few minutes on a Hollywood soundstage, the arithmetic of a divided country was suspended. Two men, one of them the biggest star in America, and one of them the man who had taught that star how to sing, simply made music, credited and equal, in front of a camera that would carry it into every theater. It looked effortless. It was not. Behind that ease lay a decision made in a closed room, a line drawn on a piece of paper, and a friendship that refused the terms it had been handed. When the take ended, Louis Armstrong lowered the trumpet and smiled his famous smile. But this time, the smile meant something it had rarely been allowed to mean before. This time, his name was going with him. The room was full of the people who decided such things. Producers, a director, the men who counted the risk in every frame. The cast sheet lay on the table between them, that same single page, Crosby's name at the top in the largest type the machine could strike. Somebody explained the problem gently, the way careful men explain money to a star. Billing Armstrong could hurt the picture in certain markets. It was cleaner to leave things as they were. Everyone would still love the music. Bing Crosby listened. He was not a man who shouted. He was famous for the opposite, for the unbothered calm that made him impossible to rush. And then, in that calm, he drew a line. If Louis Armstrong's name was not on the picture, he said, then perhaps they did not need his either. The room went silent, because that was the one sentence the numbers could not answer. Bing Crosby was the picture. His name was the reason the film would sell in every theater they were so worried about. He had just placed the thing they could not afford to lose on the same side of the scale as the thing they were trying to leave off. He had made Louis Armstrong's name and his own name inseparable, and dared them to choose. There was no argument that beat it. Not that day, not in that room. A pen moved. A name that had been meant for the blank space was written where the whole country would read it. And somewhere on that lot, a man who had learned never to expect this had no idea it had just happened. When Pennies from Heaven reached theaters, Louis Armstrong's name was on it, featured, printed, impossible to lift out. It is remembered now as one of the first times a black performer received that kind of billing beside a white star of the first rank in a major American film. A single line of type, the smallest thing, and the largest. Because a name on a screen told every black child in every segregated balcony in the country that the space beside the biggest star in America was not, after all, forbidden to them. That it could be earned, and once earned, printed, and once printed, seen. Louis Armstrong went on. He always went on. More films, more records, more decades of that horn, until What a Wonderful World made him the sound of tenderness itself for a whole new generation. And Bing Crosby never stopped saying where he had learned it. Until the end of his life, he named Louis Armstrong as the source, the teacher, the beginning. Two men who found each other across a line the country had drawn and quietly stepped over it together. Think about that single sheet of paper on the desk, the blank space where a name was supposed to be missing. Somebody decided that blank space was not acceptable. Somebody with everything to lose used what he had to fill it. We spend our lives being told which spaces are meant for us and which are not. And every so often, someone who never had to lift a finger reaches over and writes our name where the world had left it off. Louis Armstrong knew that gift when he received it. So would anyone who has ever waited to see their own name at last in the light.